And here we are with the next video. So we've just looked at the skull, looked at the regions of the skull. Few though they are, but important they are just as much as whatever. Now we're going to look at what's on top of those regions. But no, we're not going to look at individual muscle strands. We're not going to look at anything super technical because we don't need to, unless we're doing scientific, sculpting breakdowns of muscle structures. We need to know that kind of stuff. If for whatever reason you were working on a project where you had a monster where you needed that, then obviously you would look at that for that project. But to actually get the grasp of things, you don't need to know all that information. I don't know all that information at all. I don't know anything to do with the muscles of the face, besides the masseter muscle, and which goes up there, and then the frontalis muscle. Those are the only two muscle groups of the actual head that I know. The next one being the sternocleidomastoid. But the more important thing is how the skull reacts to the things that are on top of it, like flesh, fat deposits, muscles, and that kind of stuff. So I've got my subject here, and I've kept a very, very rough hair sculpt on there, just to show you that hair can play a massive... Anything that interacts with the head, clothing and hair-wise, can have a massive impact on how we actually perceive what we're looking at, because we're looking at the face most, so that's the reason that we're looking at the most, and then we take in all the secondary and tertiary details. But there's also frames as well, so we might not necessarily realize how big people's ears are because they're generally going to be covered up by the hair, or their head might not look as big or as small because they might have quite thick hair, which gives them the volume. So then when they cut it really short, you think, oh my god, you've got a small head. Or they might look like they've got thick hair, but then when they cut it short, it's like, oh my god, you've got a big head. All this kind of stuff. So you can see here, my subject's got some hair, rough sketch. Then we're going to get rid of it, and then we're going to carry on. So let's actually set up something similar to what I had in the last. So I'm going to set up a 3/4, nice and big. Shift S, and then I'm going to bring it to a back view, like that. Okay. So a lot of the same jazz is happening here than what we do with the skull. So what we're going to do is actually go from the top of the skull again. Bang. So we're going to start there and we're going to go forward again. So nothing really happens here. Obviously all down the front here we've got nothing really happening. Though this subject does have some forehead creases when she's expressing herself. Generally when she's relaxed, at least on sculpting this, she didn't really have anything, so I've not really got anything there. But then I've got some information. So now we're going to skip over a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about some of the more smaller regions we talked about in the last video. So we're talking about the horns. So these little sections here, either side of the eyes, and then those little nodes on the eye ridges there that give those forms. Now we can actually see those things kind of start to play out. We can see here that we've got, it's not really massive, but we can see that we've got a little bit of a swoop going into that nice C shape of the eye socket, formed by the underlying skull structure, and then some fats and then some flesh to give that slight raise. And then we can see here in the shadows the same things happening here. Now what else is also happening here is just flesh and fat, like I've just said. So yes, we've got the skin pulling down. There's no real muscles here that we need to worry about. You have obviously got eye muscles around your eyes, but they don't really have an impact on what we're looking at. Then it's around here. So though my subject here doesn't have a lot, she does have quite not a lot of fat. She does have quite full outer eyelids. I think they call it the sclera, I think. So here, a little bit of fat. And then when we look into eyes, we'll go over this in a lot more detail. And this is different for all over the world. Then you've got your lids, bilids, monolids, all these kind of things. Especially where your eyelid folds behind, the skin folds in behind. You can see there. So Again, this is flesh and fat, which is shaping our head. And you can see there's a little bit of shadow. You can see the little frontal lobe ridge happening there. So right here we've got some, not necessarily fat, but we've got some mass. Let's call it mass. We've got some mass which is forming the softer parts of the outside of the eye, just on the outside here, and then some softer parts that forms the upper eyelid here. And then when we look closer into this stuff to do with the eyes, and then just generally the head stuff in general, you're going to see around this area here, around the inside of the eye, where the tear duct is, there's quite a lot of information. It's quite a lot of shape that is really important to know about. Again, I'm clipping the mic a lot, sorry. There you go. So again, you got these little pockets of mass which are forming these elements. And then, though on here, in the sculpt version, they're still a little bit prominent. If I delete them for a sec, you can see here, they're still a little bit prominent. They wouldn't be that defined in real life. Because I've got a sculpting material on, what's not happening is subsurface scattering, which kind of hides a lot of the information. But then I've got I've got the mass of these eye ridges here, which then form, as you can see, this little frontal lobe kind of shape. One of my favorite parts of the human face, that. Now in here, Laura's not got a lot of glabellar information. She has in profile, and unless she expresses herself with her eyes, there's not a whole lot going on here. A few, age lines where we've got lines coming in from the face going up like that. Very subtle. You can only really see them in certain light, but there's not really that much going on with the eye ridges here with the glabella. But we have got that glabella shape there in general. The nose, nothing's really going on with this character, again, with the nose, but this is where you will have, again, not that much fat around this area to define those shapes. It's all, well, generally, again, some people who are carrying quite a lot of weight, or some people generally might, down to their genetics, might for some reason carry a bit more weight in their nose. But talking as a generalistic, around there, this is more like skin which is being pulled across the nose and pulled downwards by things in the cheeks and stuff. So here, not a lot going on. And we've spoke about the nose being mainly cartilage, cartilaginous fat and that kind of stuff. And we talk about, obviously, we'll go on this a lot more when we talk about noses. There is something I really want to point out, and it's something we can check now, and if I've not already done this in class, we'll do it in class, is if you just put your finger on the edge of your nose there, and those of you who've got this already and can see it, this isn't going to be a shock to you. Some of you, this might be a bit of a shock to you. If you just slightly move your finger around tip of your nose like that, what you'll feel is a little ridge in the bottom of your nose, and that's because there are two kind of shapes in tip of your nose. Two masses there, which give you that shape. And this is another thing that I like to define quite early on, to then push back later on. Now that's a really important shape for me, because that's when the light catches it. That's the kind of thing that I'm like, I'm not going to notice if it's not there, but when I see it, I'm like, that person has obviously thought a bit more deeper about what they're doing. They've thought about stuff. Okay, so the eye ridge is there. You can see we've got the frontal lobe coming in, obviously, and then we've got those regions of the skull which are imparting that shape. This is all still, besides the nose we've just been talking about there, this is all still mainly defined by the skull. There's no fat or muscle really at this point, besides these little bits here. They were muscle. There's nothing that much that is just fat and anything like that. Now when we come down from the nose and outwards into the cheeks, that's when things start to really change. Let me just define on the side there, the swoop, bit of fat, horn section there, into the cheek, really important. So what I like to think about is the cheek being almost like two sacks of fat being placed on your cheek, which are being held in place by a strap which goes over the top of your nose. And that's because if you look at anyone, you'll see there is, and again, it's not actually happening, but it's the kind of shapes that appear on the face. Because of that separation between the softer skin of the lower eyelid and the softer skin and the different skin of the cheek, you have this kind of separation. Some people it's really, really noticeable. And then you've got the laugh line area there, and what it creates is this kind of shape. So you can see what I'm talking about. You can see this almost like a bit of a strap which runs across the nose like that. Now that doesn't mean that I'm going to blend the ridge of my nose and basically put a straight line down. I'm still going to have the definition of my nose from the side there. I'm still going to have that. But then it goes into my cheeks. Now what's actually happening here is you've got a bunch of fat. Unless you're Mad Mikkelsen and you've got no body fat apparently. Generally you're going to have a bit of fat here in your cheeks. And let's talk about a 25-year-old. You're going to have 3 pockets of fat. Generally. You're going to have 3 pockets of fat which fill up this whole area. So you got 1 pocket of fat right there, which makes up the main mass of this cheek area. No, that's what gives you the cheeks. Then you have another small pocket there, and you have another small pocket around here. So you have these 3 kind of pocket areas. Oh, I think you also have maybe this kind of you got something going on up here as well. But generally you have fat deposits like this in your skin that are all broken up. It's sometimes why where even a thin person, an athletic person who's still got a bit of fat on the face, I can't think of an example. Emma Stone maybe, where they're in shape, they're athletic, but they've got a bit more fat in their face. When they're talking or when they tense the face or anything, you can kind of see, the fat kind of get shape, these fat areas get defined a little bit. Obviously, you've got the dimple kind of portion there, that classic dimple portion. A lot of those little dimples and stuff are all intersections of either muscle or fat or cartilage. They're not just there for anything. They're there, they're created by muscles pinning two bones or 2 points of flesh meeting but not merging. So you got these zones, you got these like regions of fat in the face. Now, when you get older and gravity pulls more and more down, these merge into one. It's why when you're young, you've got nice shapely features, but when you're older, things sag down here. So this is our nice young person here. When they get older, the shape changes. The shape turns to this. It all merges into one, and you get these jowly sections there, because all the mass, all the fat is kind of merged into one and pulled down. And it's why you get, you don't get a lot of, at least in my experience, like really, really rosy-cheeked, youthful-looking old people, because obviously, that's how it gets pulled in. It's why, some older people have quite a dominant, strong shape and a lot of laugh line information there, because all that information is being basically creased and pulled and shaped by those fat deposits. And then, weirdly enough, here get like from someone who used to have quite a youthful face, quite a chubby face, will then become very bony around here because that fat is being pulled away from that area, so they get a little bit bony around here. There's tons of examples of that. We're going to look at loads of examples of that kind of stuff, but I'm going to bring back my youthful 20-something-year-old. Okay, there you go. Okay, boom, 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 something like that. So you can see how the fat of the face is, or the shape of the face is being controlled by the fat. Obviously, down to genetics, fat distribution, lifestyles, fitness levels, you're going to have varying degrees. You might have people who will have all these fat deposits, but because then they've got a layer of fat on top of it, because all these are natural as well. Everyone has these. No one doesn't have these. These are like natural fats, not fat through bad diets or anything like that. When you have more weight that you've, through bad diet and stuff like that, then you get a layer of fat which builds upon this fat. Going further down, Then in the face, again, more fat deposits, more. Or it's not. Yeah, it is fat. We can think about it like fat, but let's just also try and think about it. It's more like flesh, lumps of flesh. So we're going down. We've had the cheeks here. We're going into the muzzle here. This is really interesting to look at different ethnicities. Is around the muzzle of the mouth. You'll have some ethnicities which are far more forward. You'll have some ethnicities which are far more kind of flatter. Some which are, how to put it, like curvier. It's just a really interesting shapely part to look at. And look at yourself. Look at people in your family. Does your mum and dad and brother and sister have, is that a family characteristic? Or like for my family, it's our eyes. My sister, and my dad all have the same eyes. But then my sister really took my mum's nose, and I really took my dad's head in general. I look a lot like my dad. Look at these things. Where do you take the shapes from, and what kind of shape are you? So, because then that all relies on again the skull underneath is going to be driving a lot of that shape, but then it's down to the natural kind of makeup of your face. But in the face, we're not going to talk about the lips in here, but you've got some kind of mass here. A lot of it's down to muscle structure as well underneath, because you have muscles which do this across the face. So they do create some form of shapes there, but generally you've got some mass there. But a really nice one that I love to point out and I love to sculpt is this one, right in the corner of the mouth. Well, you've actually got two of them. You've got one here as well. You got these two little nodes of flesh right there, and literally what people call them, the nodes. And again, it's some people have them really prominent. Some people just don't seem to have them. Some people, they don't even look like flesh. They look like just like flat strips. They look like just folds of flesh. They don't look like they've got any like substance to them. But you've all got this. It's basically a fold of flesh caused by a meeting of muscles and tendons in the corner of the mouth here, which also then cause a build-up there and there. And this is one of the things when people are sculpting either realistic or at least believable characters that sometimes makes the face look really flat because they're not thinking about these masses. Now, they don't have to be massively puffy, over-exaggerated masses, but just defining a little bit of. So maybe this character's got a little bit of mass there, and then a little bit of mass there, and then this mass here, then this mass here, going into maybe this mass here. Again, if you break up this information, if you look at a person's face, you draw over a person's face, if you have this information in there, even subtle, probably best being subtle, it just makes the face more believable. Our eyes, our brains have literally been looking at people our entire lives. So we've got a back catalogue of millions of faces in our brain that we've built up a composite image of. So when we don't see something, our brain starts to say, "Ooh, something's wrong with that." But then when we do see something, we're like, "Cool, I believe what I'm looking at." So some really nice stuff there. We'll go into that a lot more when we come into doing mouths. And then when you go down, then you've got your chin. So your chin, you can either think about it as one mass, or you can think about it as two masses. If you think about it like two masses, it's literally, again, if you feel just at the tip of your chin there, you'll feel like a little bump. That's almost like the tip of your nose, like a little bump there. So you've got two masses there. You can think about it like that. That'd be good if you had someone who had quite a bumpy, like a bum chin. I think they call it a cleft chin. You've got a little dimple there, because that gives you a good little point to make the dimple on. Like that. Or you could think about it as one big mass. Or you might even start off thinking about it as one big mass, and then later on make it into two masses. But you could start. Boom. Now the only thing I do with the chin is I first of all bring the chin out, and I then tend to flatten it at the front there to, at least at the beginning, to give myself a plane of the chin. But again, simple mass. A simple mass of the face. So going down from the front there, what have we got? Going back, because we've covered quite a lot there. From the very top of the head, there's obviously not a lot going on in the front here. Pay attention to your reference, pay attention to your subject, think about your design, think about, you know, the kind of person you want to do, because all this stuff is linked together. So in this case, I've got some form of orbital ridge, frontal lobe here, orbital ridge, what we're talking about, which then helps me define these areas here with this mass, which then helps me create this C-shaped ridge like we're talking about here. This C-shape, bang bang. Then we're going into the bridge of the nose now. For instance, my character hasn't really got that much fat on the top of her nose, so I've kept that nice and subtle. Obviously, she's not got a super bony nose, so I'm not doing that whole like Grecian statue overly exaggerated ridge of the nose. But then what I'm thinking about is the fat deposits going into her cheek, so I've built up those fat deposits. You know, those are things I need to think about, what's going on in the cheeks. You know, do I define the separation between those two skin types, lower eyelid, upper cheek area? Do I define those separations? And then we go down into the mouth, and again, what sort of stuff am I looking at? What sort of stuff do I want to do? You know, if you're doing some super luscious, super sexy vixen, maybe you want to put a bit more information in the lips there. Maybe you want to do some strung out crackhead. You'll take away that mass there. If you want to make someone look conniving, maybe you make it very thin and very, very thin-lipped. If you want to make someone look very approachable, maybe you give them a smaller upper. Again, we'll go back. I think I said in the last video, my bald Canadian lumberjack. If we do him, maybe we have a thinner upper lip, but then a bigger lower lip. A little bit like Laura here. You know, again, you're creating this mass, these shapes. The more softer shapes you show, generally the more nicer the character is. So you're looking around that area. Well, that's if you're designing characters. If you're looking at a subject from reference, then you're looking for these key areas. You're looking for any kind of mass in the lips, any kind of mass in the corners of the mouth, in those nodes, any mass in what I call the Marlon Brando muscle. It's not even a muscle. It's this area we're talking about right there. Right there. Do I see any mass there? And then going into the chin, what's happening with the lower lip? Does it just go into the chin as one big kind of like shape, or do I have like a balcony? You know, again, if we go back to these shapes here, you know, that's my upper lip. Do I have quite a subtle shape like that, which is quite a soft shape, or do I have quite a balconied lower lip? Careful with that one as well. If you make the lower lip too overhanging, you'll make your character will always just look like it's about to cry. It's kind of got that wobbly bottom lip look. Oh, so fat deposits, chin, and then we're going to the chin. How big is the chin? Does your subject have a clean definition like we were just talking about then between lip and chin? Do they have a recessed chin? Do they have quite a prominent chin? Is it a wide chin, thin chin, pointy chin, flat chin? All these different things. And if we go back into the head a little bit more, there are just other places it's good to think about, and this is where muscles kind of come into it, so I'll get a red for this. So we've got some muscles controlling this area here. So if we kind of on your cheek, I know we're going to talk about muscles that much, but it is good to think about this kind of stuff. On the lower eyelid here, you obviously got your lower orbital ridge there, and then you got muscles which wrap around the mouth. I'll try and do slightly so I'm not covering up everything. But you got muscles which go across like that, which your fat sits on top of, and it's why, you know, when you stretch your face, your fat flattens out, because obviously that fat is connected to that muscle, and then when you stretch out that muscle, that fat gets stretched out and flattened out, and then when you squid your face together, it's why when you contract the muscle, you're contracting the fat, and it brings the fat together and puffs it up. Then you've also got the masseter muscle, which is, well, you got your zygomatic arch there going into your ear. Then you got obviously got temporal ridge there, you've got a muscle which goes right there, which I often just, in my mind's eye, I just put that as part of a mass. For some reason, when I ever think of the master muscle, I always think of like bad guys in films sat across a table from someone eating something, and the light's playing off the jawline. You can see them chewing like a bit of meat, and it's like this muscle right there that shapes really nicely. It's not a nice muscle. You know, it's not a sexy muscle. It's not a muscle. Well, I don't think it is anyway. It's not a muscle which you use to show kindness of someone. For some reason, I always, in my mind's eye, I always put it to a bad guy. But it's this mass here. It does also show strength as well. You could use it on stronger characters to define that nice sharp jawline. Just for some reason, I always get bad guy in my brain. But it's a muscle which comes underneath, attaches to the lower jaw there, comes up and spreads into this area here. It's why when you're chewing something, you can feel it right there. You know, next time you're eating, basically just start chomping, you know, start dry eating anything. Tensing your jaw and stuff. You'll feel that part of your head there start to tense up a little bit. It's because it's got master muscles that stretch underneath your zygomatic arch and then attached to your temporal ridge there. About one of the only muscle groups in the head that I ever really care about. And you can feel it. That's why you can feel it. If you chomp your jaw, you can feel it there. But that's quite a nice one just to give a bit more shape if that's what you need. If you're doing a larger character, doing a fatter character, then that fat is you're gonna have more fat deposits sitting on top. You know, we were talking about, you know, you've got these natural fat deposits everyone has. It's kind of pretty much down to protection. Then you put fat on top of it through, you know, bad diet and stuff, or just aging or genetics. You know, you get that there, but that's because you're getting like fat deposits building up around the neck, which then create that mass. Fat isn't one big lump as well, it's sections of fat. You know, the body just doesn't create fat in random areas. It kind of generates in shapes. So it's kind of disgustingly interesting looking at fat. But you have all these like regions of fat building up, which then create that. Like even just by putting that information in there, it already looks a little bit more fatter because I'm getting rid of that shape of the jaw. So these are all the shapes within the skull, or they're all the mass and forms in the skull that I really care about. And then when we go around the back of the head, it differs a little bit. So obviously we've got, you know, mass and stuff that we're looking at the front there. Around the back, you know, you've got your little nodule-y, ridgy thing there that's obviously your occipital lobe. Unless you're doing fat characters, again, so if we're going off this fat character here that we've been building, you know, you might have a few, you know, neck fat deposit ridgy kind of things going on. Maybe the back of the ear's a little bit more fatter. Maybe you've got a wider neck. There's no definition in the jaw there. You've got fat coming down from the chin to fill this area like mine. You know, give yourself a jowl. Maybe you've lost, through the fat, you've lost that whole occipital ridge altogether. Maybe that's just gone and it's got a flatter. Maybe you still have a nice slender neck, but because you want this to be a much more softer character, you get rid of it. Of course, you're probably going to be putting hair on this character anyway, so some of this information is redundant. You know, it's good to put that in there for zoning reasons to measure stuff, but really, if you're doing a character which is going to have long hair and she's meant to be like a beautiful whatever maiden, you're not going to see it. If you're going to be doing your brute characters like skinhead and all that kind of stuff, then you might see it because that suits that character. Loads of things you've got to think about character design. But yeah, around the neck, the only thing you've really got to think about is, depending on the type of character you've got, is there some kind of fat roll in the back of the neck? We're not going to go too deep into it because we've got a whole video about this coming up anyway, but you've got, obviously, muscles, which join to the back of the neck. You got your trapezius, muscles which attach to the back of the neck. And then you've got your, there is a name for this, but I completely, some sort of valley something. You've got a little valley which runs down the back of the neck. And one of the only really cool things about this is right here, It's about right there. If you follow down the back of your neck, you might feel a little bit of a lump, and it's literally what would be considered the bottom of your neck and the beginning of your body. That's called your C7. That's a vertebrae which sticks out, and so when we look at muscles, it's a really cool shape that it makes. But other than that, that's pretty much it for all the fat deposit stuff. Again, around the side of the head, you don't really get that much. On really big characters, you might want to put a little bit extra fat around here, and I'm talking minute amounts. You don't want to give them like bubble brain. But you might see really people who've got a lot of fat will often have like little fat buildups around the top of the ears. That kind of stuff. Loads. We could talk for hours about this kind of thing. So we've talked about the fat deposits there. Let's talk about areas where the mass, the fat, and the skull kind of work together, and what actually is happening. Well, we've been talking about it anyway, but let's reiterate it. Let's get the purple. So mainly that's going to be, again, top of the eyelids here, so top of the eyebrows. So around here, that's obviously where you got your skull affecting that shape of your eyebrow. And then you got here, you got your cheek. Actually, that needs a better. Let's go green. You got your cheek here. Obviously, this front part of the cheek here is that part of the cheek there. It's probably going to be the further. If you look at the character from the side, it's probably going to be the furthest forward your cheek is going to be. Is this portion here, and that's because if we draw a little skull here, that's where your cheekbone is. So obviously all the fat is wrapping on top of that. It's still, like we talked about, it's still coming down like this. It's not going down directly downwards. It's getting swept backwards, but it's the furthest forward you'll have it. So right here is where you have the main mass, and then it falls away into different areas. Depending on how thin you are in the general skull shape, you're going to have your zygomatic arch impacting some of the shape, going to the back of your back towards your ear there. Again, you only really see that on either people who've got like very, very low fat to body index kind of thing, BMI kind of thing. Yeah, fat to body ratios, that's the one. Whatever it is. Fat to muscle, there you go. Or someone who's like super shredded. I've seen a few like really jacked dudes who have that, but I think that's down to steroids. I think these are kind of like bodybuilder types who might be taking steroids. That's the only time when I ever see that prominent shape. And other than that, it kind of blends into everything around it. It blends in the cheeks. You rarely get like really defined shapes there. Your chin, obviously, is another place where you're going to get a lot of information imparted from the bone and the actual muscle. So obviously, you're not just gonna if you've got a chin, it's not just mass, because then you'd be able to, do whatever you want with it. It's like flicking your earlobe. There will be a chin underneath, which then this fat is sitting on top of. It's always good to think about. If you've been given a skull to build a head on top of for whatever reason, look at the shape of the chin. Or if you're building a skull from a character for whatever reason, look at the shape of the chin. If you're doing like a superhero with like a big, chin, don't give him a skull with got a small chin, because then that doesn't make any sense. This would literally just be like poking fat on meat and stuff. It wouldn't have any structure. And then you've got places, really, really nice places like the jaw. I only really concentrate on the bottom of the jaw here, and where the master muscle is at the back. So around here. I only really build on that, and that's just about, if I'm doing like a person with a nice jawline, I like to just build up this shape just a touch, because there is obviously a nice right angle there, and you're going to have some shape there. And what that is doing is just punching that information forward a little bit, because it is obviously close to the skin, very close to the skin. Then you got the nasal ridge as well. So the nasal ridge right there. Now on this character, I've kept it very subtle. There's not really that much bone there because I didn't want to give her that information. But if I was doing some sort of really shredded Grecian god body kind of person, then I would look at maybe like in old sculptures, you'd see almost like it's almost like a knuckle in the nose there. Because that information is there. Some people do have. I can feel it on me. I've got like little ridges either side of my nasal bone. Some people do. Some people don't. Again, it's very person. They accentuated it. A lot of these old Renaissance sculptors, Grecian sculptors, would emphasize certain things just for aestheticness. But you could emphasize that a little bit. So as you can see, our face is getting a little bit messy at the minute. But that's kind of all the things that are going through my head when I'm sculpting stuff, all at once as well. The more you do this, the more this will become second nature, and it's more about playing with the forms. Literally, you'll go from making a kind of crappy sculpt in an hour to making a good sculpt in about 20 minutes. In that, from taking 1 hour to make a kind of crappy sculpt to taking 20 minutes to make a good sculpt. And you'll start to think less and less and less about stuff overtly and just kind of think about stuff as an overall shape. Because you just kind of got to remember that the skull is the most dominant feature of the body, of the head. It controls everything. And then on top of that, then you've got your muscles and your fat. The fat is one of the main things of the human head which shapes it as well. Unlike the body, where you've obviously got like deltoids and pectorals and trapeziuses and all that kind of stuff, you've not really got that much information. You don't train muscles of the face, or at least it's rare to see people training muscles of the face unless they want a certain look. I don't know. I've never seen it. But the muscles that are in the face are small, not very long. The biggest one is probably the masseter muscle, which is that jaw muscle. All the rest are really, really small and really don't have any impact. So we have to make the shapes through thinking about mass, thinking about the folds. When a mass of fat ends, you're probably going to have some kind of dip or fold. It's not just going to end and then carry on, because then you might as well just consider that one big mass. So for instance, you've got, I'll make it a bit darker. I'll make it purple. So you got right there. You've got the laugh line. The laugh line is created by a number of different things, but if we just think about it as like just the fat of the cheek, that laugh line is basically where a fat pat ends, and creates that shape. Same thing for that little separation point between the lower eyelid and the upper cheek. It's literally where a fat pad ends and another one begins. That fold underneath the chin there, fat pad ends, another begins. The dimple in cheek right there, it's where fat pads end, others begin. And then you got to think about the skull underneath it. Now, when we're talking about fat as well, what I don't want us to think about on the head anyway is fat being balls of fat. It's the same thing that when we're going to be talking about muscles of the body. Don't think about muscles as like balls of muscles of like thick tendons of steak or anything like that. It's not what they are. These fat deposits are like, if I do like a little diagram, if we got a region of bone there, then we'll have thin muscles on top. Maybe a bit thinner than that. There we go. So we have thin strips of muscles, and then we'll have a thin layer of fat, and then we'll have our multiple layers of skin, like the dermis and stuff. So, though it might feel very deep, it might only be like a centimeter of, muscle, fat, and skin. It might not actually be that much. It's just because it's in a small area. So when you're thinking about these things, you don't think about masses like puddles, piles of fat. Think about thin strips of fat, which are basically built up, sculpted up to make these forms.
That's why, again, it's one of the things that are going through my head when I'm sculpting, and that secondary kind of like transic nature is muscles and fat aren't balls, they're strips. And if I lay down the strips, I can keep them nice and thin. We can make the shapes a lot more nicer rather than trying to build them up in big circles. So there's a lot of information there. And we've not got any weird fancy names there because I'm sure there is. Well, besides the master muscle, this guy here. But it's more about just thinking about the mass of someone's face. And we'll be looking at examples of this in class, and I'll probably be doing videos where I'm doing draw-overs of people's faces. But this stuff is really important to think about. Because again, it's just one of those things that if you want to go into character design, character drawing, character modeling, comics, this is stuff you need to know about. Even if you're doing stylistic stuff, not everyone's going to look the same, even in a stylistic thing. You know, how would you, if you don't know about the regions with the fat in the face or the regions of muscles in the body, how do you then stylize it? You're playing guesswork. And then because you're playing guesswork, you'll never have a really strong consistency, so then your character's going to get really sloppy and kind of fumble. And then you're going to have to make everything overly stylized, and then it just looks boring, in my opinion. But then people are going to question, well, I want to be an environment artist, something like this. What is the planet but a big rocky person? You know, there's reasons why things are built up the way they are. But also, if you're being an environment artist, what if you work on a title which is organic based? Take Scorn, for instance. Scorn, the game. That game is based around the walls being made of meat and bone, essentially. It's a very gross game. So, gross in a good way. Plus, it just gives you a bit of an insight. There is no reason why no one should want to do this. It's a really, really fun, fun kind of thing to do. It's an eye-opener. Plus, it makes you think about stuff a lot more. It makes you think about things differently. You know, again, when I was a young character artist, I still had a job somehow. I still got a job as a character artist. And I fumbled my way through, but it only took me maybe in my mid-20s when I actually sat down and started looking at this properly, and I started seeing a lot of things that I was doing wrong, and I started seeing a lot of things that I needed to work on. And ever since then, I got better and better and better. And it's also helped me just being as an artist in general. You know, because of this, I feel comfortable doing hard surface 3D because I could have this approach to it. Anyway, waffling on a little bit. Those are all the fat deposits and masses of the head that I'd like us to think about. Again, draw-overs are brilliant. Think about all these things we're talking about and just get loads of different examples of heads, especially bald heads, because obviously hair will hide everything. Loads of different examples of bald people, and then just draw over these kind of areas: the frontal lobe, the parietal, the occipital, if you can see it, those little horn sections, little nubby sections, you know, the ridge of the nose, separation between the moist lower eyelid and the cheek fat. Can you see the separations in cheek fats if it's a younger person, especially if it's a fitter person? Can you see the way that the strips of fat and muscle curve across down into the cheek rather than just coming down across the mouth? So they come down and backwards, get pulled backwards. Can you see the nodes, the two nodes of the mouth? Can you see these little... It's almost like someone's smuggling Maltesers in the lower part of the jaw. What's going on with the chin? Can you see a clear separation between lower lip and upper chin? Or is it one mass? All these things, just think about. And then try and draw that mass over. And then try and sculpt it. So yeah, bit of a longer video than the other one, but not much. But there's just, with this, there's just a lot more nuance to talk about. Because obviously with the skull, it's this, and this. With this, and this is just on this subject as well. This is a subject of Laura Bailey, the voice actress, and that's her. But if I was to do another character of a different age, different ethnicity, I'd have to think about things differently. That's where the human body kind of starts to get a bit weirder, is when you come out of the skull, out of the bones, out of the muscles, and you start talking about fat deposits and flesh and that kind of stuff, things start to get very unique. And that's where a lot of the characterization comes into it. And then when you know all this kind of stuff, you can then go and do creatures, because then you know how to build and take away and all that kind of jazz. Cool, so I'm going to leave it there, and then the next video, we'll see what's going on with that one in a bit.